Okay, we've talked about how and why the Industrial Revolution came about. Now we're going to be talking about the consequences. I'm going to be starting out with some of the positives. You can see down here, this is some of the new fashions and designs that were created during the Industrial Revolution, and as a result of the Industrial Revolution, you had a new group of people called the middle class. The Industrial Revolution brought on new jobs and new industry and new wealth and new ways of making money. I talked about before the Agricultural Revolution, vast majority of people were farmers, and as new industry was created, new jobs were created, and because of new jobs, you have this new group called the middle class. And you have the middle class being filled with factory owners, factory overseers, bankers become more popular, merchants become more popular, people that sell the goods. So you have a new group, and we're going to be calling them the bourgeoisie as well, because they're also referred to as the bourgeoisie. So this is a new group that didn't really exist before the Industrial Revolution. You have new jobs, and not only new jobs, but you have people with higher wages, so they can buy things that they never were able to buy, and products become cheaper because they're made differently and in greater volume. So that's a positive. Again, the bourgeoisie, the middle class, and their numbers are going to grow as time goes on in the Industrial Revolution. Again, the bourgeoisie. A lot of people are going to look at them in a negative light. Some of the wealthy are going to look at them in a negative light. Previously, the only wealthy people or people that had money were the nobility. And they're going to say, who are these new people that think they're all that, and people that have money. But these people control enterprises, they control the industry, and the poor are going to look down on them because the poor aren't going to be able to wear such a cool hat as that, or dress in such nice dresses. And so they're going to be called the proletariat, and we're going to focus on the negatives now. The working class, these people are going to be the poor. These are the people working in the factories, and the bourgeoisie are going to be accused of getting rich off of the back of the proletariat, and that's for you to decide. That's an argument, and I'm not going to teach that as whether that's fact or not. But here you can see the proletariat. You can see their conditions are very bad. The conditions aren't good. They work long hours, 12 to 14 hours. We talked about all this. And the proletariat are seeing quite a difference. The proletariat are down here. They're living in low life. Working class is rough. And then you have the bourgeoisie, the middle class, and even the upper class living life in much better conditions. But here you have a growth of cities. People are coming in the cities to get jobs because farmers aren't needed as much. And you have this growth of cities called urbanization. The urban community grows. And you have these dirty and unsafe conditions. You have huge pollution forming. And the middle class really don't see any of those negatives. It's the working class that see the negatives there. And their conditions are pretty bad. They're pretty negative, as you can see down here. But they're also faced with their jobs are getting taken away from them by machines. And we talked about how they respond with this, and we talked a lot about child labor as another negative with the working class and the negative of the outcome of the Industrial Revolution. But these Luddites were formed to go in and break machines, because the machines were taking the jobs of the working class. So if you would see modern day Luddite, you would see something to this effect. Let's say a washing machine was taking someone's job. Someone would throw a brick into a washing machine and cause the brick to crash and fall apart. So that didn't really work as well as but there you go. The machine is getting broken. A Luddite would do something like that. That's a modern day version of a Luddite. But so that's one way the Industrial Revolution was impacted by the working class. They fought back through the Luddites. They'll fight back in other ways, and we'll talk about that in a second. So here's the thing. you see these really poor conditions, you see the poor starving, and there's basically three views of thought on how to deal with this situation. The most common thought at the time was capitalism. It was created by Adam Smith. Adam Smith created it. This is popular in the 18th century, and he basically comes up with this idea that the government should not get involved with how people make money or spend money. And this is obviously, you can tell, a negative view of capitalism. It's described by a socialist that the rich, the bourgeoisie, are taking advantage of the proletariat and basically killing them off in blunt terms. Capitalists would look at this up here and say, you know what, let people work this out on their own. Don't let the government get involved. If you want to help the poor, you can give to private organizations. But basically, let the poor rise up. Let the poor work hard, and they can get out of this situation. But don't let the government get involved. Let nature do its course. Let people act on their own, and that will take care of this situation. Make the situation better. With more wealth comes with capitalism comes more wealth, and with more wealth, that trickles down to the people to see the effect. Well, a lot of people didn't buy that, and a lot of people thought capitalism had problems. So you had socialism. Now socialism, you can see capitalism is negatively looked at as the rich taking advantage of the poor. For socialism, someone can say, well, it's the complete opposite. It's the poor, see, he has no money, taking advantage of the rich. And basically this is where the government does get involved, and their idea is to help the greatest number of people, and there were a lot of poor people, so it was the idea of the government getting involved to take care and help the poor people. Okay? And it was basically, the whole idea was to create more of an equality among the people, so poor would be taken care of. The best example of that is by a guy that started a well, he attempted to make a utopia, Robert Owen. It was in New Lanark in Scotland, and here you had workers getting all the same wages, very equal in conditions in where they lived. There was none of this in New Lanark, the area that Robert Owen created. The factory workers were paid all the same, and Robert Owen owned the factory with some other shareholders, but no one was really filthy rich, and all the money was distributed more equally. And it actually worked for quite some time, and made some profits. But that was a small picture of what socialism could do. But socialism as in really working out and redistribution of wealth was not really practiced during the Industrial Revolution. This is just a small example. And then you had the communists. Again, we talked about the proletariat, the poor, the working class. Karl Marx, he's the guy right here. He's the guy who came up with communism, with another guy named Engels, who came up with a book called the Communist Manifesto. And Karl Marx said, forget about the government. Socialism said you need the government to help distribute the wealth. He said these guys right here need to rise up, and they need to take out the bourgeoisie, the factory owners, the overseers, and they need to take over the factories themselves and create the distribution of wealth without the government there. So when the poor take over the factories, they rise up violently. Violence was called upon. What would happen was the factories would be taken over, and the factory workers would then distribute the wealth. Pretty much like socialism, but it was much more anticipated that violence would occur. It would be a worldwide revolution of workers that would take over. Well, those are three different views on how to deal with this change in the Industrial Revolution. You had capitalism, socialism, and communism. The facts are, you had the reform laws. The government did make some changes. They weren't drastic changes like fully socialist or fully communist. In fact, communism, as Karl Marx called for, never happened. Or fully capitalism. They do change slowly. A reform means a small change. They do make small changes more towards a socialistic viewpoint. For example, they allow unions. Unions were groups of organizations to represent workers' interests, and their big weapon was strikes. Here you can see these are workers going on strike, and it was a powerful weapon. The government actually started to allow workers to go on strike and demand better conditions. They also had reform laws where children were no longer allowed to work. They had acts where women were not allowed to work in coal mines. Again, this is moving away of capitalism and starting to move towards socialism. They even came up in Great Britain universal health care in the early 1900s, that all people were given health insurance. So these are things to basically focus on the proletariat and make their life easier. Whether you agree with that or not, that's your opinion. That's the great thing about history. There's a lot of different opinions on how best to deal with these things. Last thing, William Wilberforce during the Industrial Revolution got rid of, abolished slavery in all British colonies, and that was another thing the government did, a small reform during the, well, not small to the slaves, but a reform towards the people in the Industrial Revolution. Here are some of the changes and the consequences of the Industrial Revolution.